Welcome to Conversations with Claire. I'm Claire Rolston from CLR Law, and I've been an employment lawyer for over 25 years. And I'm starting a series of conversations with different people about different topics in the HR and employment law world. So today we have Manuela Andrew from Midlife with Manny, who has travelled all the way from Brisbane in Australia to come and share her expertise around perimenopause. I first met Manny on a ski trip back in January. We're both part of the Dent Accelerator, and we met on a ski trip where we were roommates. And we hadn't met each other beforehand, but we instantly clicked. Our personalities and also subject areas very much are intertwined, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
And on a bit of a whim, I think Manny decided she was going to come over to the UK in the summer, which is where we are now, and do a few things. So here we are in the podcast studio. So welcome, Manny.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what your business is about?
Sure. Other than I don't believe this is actually summer, so it's a little bit different to what I was expecting. This is more my winter. But yes, I actually started Midlife with Manny about 4 years ago because I had gone to a doctor to find out what was happening with my body when things were changing so much. And because she really wasn't able to answer me, I had to do some research for myself. And in doing that research, I came across some statistics that were really shocking for me. And it was actually research that was done here in the UK. A group of around 4,000 women were surveyed of middle age. And I believe it was in the finance or perhaps mortgage industry. And they found that 47% of women were not taking on promotions, that 23% were reducing their hours of paid work by up to half, and 11% were leaving the workforce entirely. I found that quite astounding. And then I went on to learn that in Australia, women aged 55 and over continue to be the fastest growing demographic of homelessness. I'm in that demographic now. And when I was a young woman in my very early 20s, working, studying, it never once occurred to me that I could become part of that kind of a demographic, certainly not in a first world nation. So that actually made me really interested in looking at what are we doing to support women in midlife to have the sort of career opportunities that we were actually promised as young Gen Xers. We were told we could do anything, be anything, achieve anything, and actually it's not actually quite true. So I think this is a really important conversation that we're having, and there are some wonderful things happening around this now from a medical education perspective, but a lot of us are still getting our information from social media because it's going to take years and years and years for our medical profession to catch up. So in the meantime, what concerns me is the risks that women face, and I think that's part of the conversation we wanted to have today is around, what does that look like? How do we support women in the workplace? How do we make sure that they are taking on those promotions? Because let's face it, by the time you're at the age that we are now, you've got many years of life experience and work experience under your belt. You have a lot of knowledge to share, and potentially you're an awesome mentor for young women coming along. But it is very easy to see how when you are no longer in charge of your own body and you feel like you're no longer in control of the one thing that you feel you are entitled to be in control of, you do question whether you are capable of leading other people when you can't really lead yourself. So I'm really interested to see what comes out of today and what you can share as well about what comes up in tribunals, and then perhaps we can have a chat about some things workplaces can do to support women.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed when I was doing a little bit of research that claims in the Employment Tribunal where menopause is cited have tripled since 2022, which is a huge jump, in claims, and the things that women are having to deal with in the workplace. As you say, it's quite high levels leaving their jobs because of these things. So In terms of tribunal cases, quite often disability discrimination is the claim that's pursued, and menopause symptoms can be classed, would have to be classed as a disability in order to pursue that claim. And that sort of revolves around long-term and adverse effects, substantial and long-term adverse effects. Can you talk about symptoms in terms of, what symptoms look like and how they would be long-term and substantial?
Sure. And this is where it's really tricky, actually, because we know that around 20% of women won't have any active or noticeable perimenopause symptoms. That doesn't mean that nothing's changing for them. It just means that they're not aware of it. So if you consider things like your bone density decreasing, your muscle mass decreasing. So that's that side of things. Then we've got around 60% of women who will have a mixed bag of symptoms, and it's never one size fits all. You can expect not to have the same symptoms that your mother or your sister had, for example. And so it's very individual. It depends on your genetics. It also depends on your socio-economic background, your education levels even. So that's about 60% of us. And then we have 20% of women who really run the gamut. They get so many terrible invasive symptoms. And most of us, we think about things like brain fog. We're all familiar with baby brain pretty much. And what's interesting is that the brain is actually rewiring itself. I find this fascinating. For the body to know that it needs to breastfeed a child, it has to create the infrastructure. When you're no longer breastfeeding, it removes the infrastructure as far as your brain. Otherwise, you'd be lactating every time you heard a baby cry. So I find this really extraordinary, and I don't think enough of us are aware that your brain is rewiring. So the brain fog is potentially one of the most challenging, in addition to a lack of sleep. If you've ever been in a household with a baby in it, you know what that lack of sleep does for you the next day. But when you're at work and people know that you have a baby at home, they're very forgiving. Everyone understands. When you come to work in your 50s and you've only had 3 hours sleep, people don't understand. And I think that is one area where these conversations are happening now, and we are seeing those huge rises in the amount of claims. The difficulty thing is it a full disability in the way that we understand disabilities, which are usually fairly static? Whereas you're not one and done when you're in perimenopause. Your symptoms are likely to change. They will evolve. Some will disappear. Some will turn up later on. And because we have a time frame of anywhere from 2 years to 10 years plus, there is no end date in sight. We don't know when it's going to stop. And let's face it, none of us want them. If we could opt out, if there was an opt-out button, we would all be opting out. No, thank you, not today, it's just not convenient. But we don't have an opt-out button, and I think that's where we have to use some empathy. And we have to look at it very much on a one-by-one individual basis. Tricky.
Yeah, so what is the sort of the one symptom that is the least understood? You've mentioned a few symptoms there, sort of, fatigue, lack of sleep, brain fog. What would you say is the one symptom that employers might misunderstand the most?
I don't think there is just one, because there's well over 100 symptoms now. Like, some of them are silly little things. Like, have you ever had a thread on your trousers or a skirt, and you feel like there's a thread tickling your leg all the time? So you have these nerve impulses and flashes and things. There's hair loss. There's, BO. Your body odour comes back, at times. Not for everyone. Again, it's very individual. So I think that's a really hard one to answer, unfortunately. And it might be that over time that they assign a gradient, and a severity level. But for some people, even if you think of a hot flush, it's not just a flash in the pan. It can last minutes, and you are absolutely sweating. It's just things that we often don't understand because no one's ever talked about it before out loud either.
And I think that's one of the problems with menopause being fitted into the disability discrimination regime, rather than it being a standalone protected characteristic, because there's a very set definition for disability under the Equality Act.
Correct.
And I believe the same, applies in Australia as well. So it is difficult because some people's symptoms will fluctuate wildly, or
Yes.
two people can have the same symptom, but it impacts them very differently. So
And it's a spectrum, just
Yeah.
like everything. There's a spectrum and a bell curve. And, the symptom that you have, or the intensity that you might experience one day, 1 week, 1 month might vary again. So I think it's a really nuanced conversation. It's a really tricky area.
And so how does that then feed into the support that an employer might offer? Is there a best version of support, or how does that look like?
I think there are some things that more employers could do. I know that one of the more difficult things for me initially was I didn't even know that there was a menopause society in my area. My doctor didn't think to mention that, you could download a perimenopause symptom checklist, track your symptoms for a few weeks, then come back and let's have a look at what you're dealing with. So that would be my very first suggestion, is for women to have access to a symptom checklist. And even if you're a workplace where you can have it on your intranet, how convenient. Don't make people go looking for information. If you give people the right information, they will use it. So if you can, one of the things I learnt from attending the International Menopause Conference in Melbourne 2 years ago was the doctor said, look, you've got less than 10 minutes with your doctor, unless you book a long appointment, which are fairly rare these days, and they're more expensive, and we're all paying out of pocket for them. And she said, look, ideally, you will identify your top 3 symptoms. So we triage. So I call it track, triage, treat, repeat. So you'll track your symptoms 3, 4, 6 weeks, whatever you like. Identify the top 3 that are impacting your life the most. I would imagine sleep would be right up there. And then take that to your doctor. Have the conversation, because they need to have conversations not only around a medical approach, but also your lifestyle and nutritional habits as well. Now, you'll find that if you decide to go down the hormone replacement therapies route, 80 to 90% of your symptoms, maybe more, will probably be dealt with fairly conveniently, and you'll be back to business as normal, hopefully. But if not, let's deal with those 3 symptoms first. Then you come up with a treatment plan with the doctor, and then you'll go and track again. So from a workplace perspective, we're also going to see, do women have someone they can talk to at work? Is there a women's circle or a women's group where you just can be heard, or you can just vent? Sometimes that's good, just to get off your chest and go, I had the worst sleep. And someone empathises with you, rather than feeling like you can't share how you're feeling. So I think having access on the internet to local menopause society, whether you have some sort of support group at work, a designated person who is the go-to person to chat with. I think it's important for leaders to understand that sleep, there is a reason sleep deprivation has been used as a very successful form of torture for centuries. We don't perform to our best capacity, and that doesn't mean it's going to be like that always. And I feel that most people want to do a good day's work for their pay. Mm-hmm. So I really don't think that people will try to take advantage. Most people will try to do the right thing, but it might be about flexible work options. It might mean that someone has to come to work a little bit later and they stay a little bit longer, or they start earlier and finish earlier. Maybe there's a couple of work from home days. So I think it's about having the one-on-one conversation and being prepared for it to tweak and change and be flexible, because this woman is dealing with stuff that she's never had to deal with before. No one's prepared her. This language, most of us didn't know perimenopause was a thing 3 years ago. So I think it's a really important conversation around how can we help you to help yourself? Because, like I said, when you give people the right information, I think we can make good decisions for ourselves on the whole.
And I think that when you say, 3 years ago, I think that's borne out by the tribunal cases in the UK,
yes,
where the majority seem to be from 2020 onwards. There are some prior to that, but the majority where it's talking about menopause and perimenopause symptoms being classed as disabilities, it's a fairly recent conversation.
Yes.
From what you're saying, though, it is about the employer creating this environment where, there is a menopause champion and there are groups where it can be talked about, and, people are finding their way together, as it were, making it okay to ask for reasonable adjustments if it whether it's classed as a disability or not, but having that environment where it's safe to talk about it.
And I think, like my mum's generation, they certainly never talked about it. And I think that people didn't go and talk about it because it makes you look weak. like I said earlier, if you can't control your own body, what on earth makes you think you can control anything else? So because we've had that kind of approach and people have kept silent and they've struggled along silently, and a lot of the time what I've learnt is, through research has shown as well, that women will often turn the blame inward. They'll blame themselves for not being able to cope, not being able to push through, not being able to manage. It's a personal failing, and it's not at all. It's a biological transition that we were never made ready for. So I think there has to be a little bit of empathy and understanding in the workplace that this is new for everyone.
Yeah,
as far as identifying it and how to manage it.
Yeah, and also as well, I was just going to add to that you yourself may not realise what you're going through, and I think a lot of these symptoms are attributed to other causes, anxiety or, and quite often doctors, and I know this from, anecdotally from friends, but, they'll be given antidepressants, for example, and somebody may not know what they're actually going through and realise that their performance at work is being affected by that. So,
and it creeps up.
It does.
It's not like it knocks on the door and says, "Hi, I'm here. Make way." It sneaks up on you, and there's slowly, and that's why you feel incompetent at times, because things that never used to bother you before, you used to handle much better, you don't seem to have necessarily the same tolerance for. And I think that's why the anxiety is a big one, and being put on antidepressants is a bit of a double-edged sword, because at the same time, because when progesterone drops, we're basically then estrogen dominant, but that drop in progesterone is when we're also experiencing the night sweats, okay? So when they give you an SSRI or an SNRI, which is your antidepressants, that's also working on the same neural pathways as your hot flushes. So they're trying to help, but maybe the better answer might be something else.
Yeah. Okay. And you talked about flexibility, and there's obviously lots of things that can be done fairly easily within a workplace, obviously in conversation between the employee and their employer. But Australia talks about flexibility. I've been reading that as that's the number one ask from individuals. From what you hear from obviously the things that you do and go to, is flexibility the absolute fix, do you think?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's just one to have in your toolkit. Not everybody needs that. And look, let's face it, not everyone necessarily has a home environment that is in their best interest either. So for some women, coming to work is a really safe environment for them. It's a place where they are heard and treated respectfully, and that may not be something that they get at home. So I think that's, if you're a doctor or you're a leader of women, that's something to bear in the back of your mind when a woman is coming to you for help. She's not doing so lightly. She probably doesn't have anywhere else to go. So I think it's, again, a really nuanced conversation. It's around, yes, flexibility is helpful, just understanding as well, being able to listen to someone share their feelings. I did read somewhere that being able to name your feelings helps to make it less pervasive. Being able to share the experience with someone else is huge. So I think just feeling like, I'm safe here in my workplace because I'm allowed to talk about it. There is someone I can go and see. There's information provided to me. And what about education? I mean, I think part of it is also that most women, it's scary when you don't know stuff. And if you can educate people in your workplace, because where else are they going to get it from? Most people are busy every day. We've got long commutes to and from work. We've got children we're looking after. We've got parents we're looking after. You're not carving out a lot of time for yourself at the end of the day. And if you have got an hour to yourself, you don't really want to read a boring menopause book either. So how can we do it where the men in our lives and our colleagues are also well educated about what's happening so that there's a bit more empathy in the workplace?
Yeah, and it is great that a lot more employers now are doing that awareness piece, and they're raising awareness, they're doing the training. But from looking at a lot of the case law, process seems to be the thing that lets employers down. So, the manager hasn't had the right conversation, they've not asked the right questions. Do you see that amongst the women you speak to? It's, they've tried to raise it, but they do recognise there's an issue, but they just haven't received the right response from their employer.
And fair enough too, because it's so new for everyone and no one's been prepared. No one knows how to have these sort of challenging conversations. It's almost like having a conversation around grief and these other areas that are uncomfortable to have conversations with someone who is your boss potentially or someone who's your supervisor. It's fairly personal. And again, you don't really want to be in a position where you feel like you're giving someone else ammunition to say that you're not competent in your job. So I can understand it is really nuanced. And I think that, again, the more education we can share, it takes away some of the stigma and it allows people to feel like I'm justified in feeling how I am. Everyone understands that there is a spectrum. Some days will be better than others. We know that for some people it lasts longer than others. I think that everywhere people will struggle because our leaders, we expect a lot from our leaders, don't we? They have to be like a parent. It's like being a school teacher. You know, you're expected to know a lot and do a lot. But I think, again, education is going to be key.
And are you seeing a lot of managers or employers refer an employee to occupational health, for example, or seek further medical guidance, or is it more just relying on the employee themselves with, to name their symptoms?
Yes. Do you know, probably 2 years ago in my own workplace, I went and wanted to speak to somebody about it and was told, look, this is something that we expect people to do on their own. Well, you know what? Those times have passed. We can't do it all on our own anymore. This is a different world now. And I think that whereas in Australia we often have EAP, where people can go and get some support, usually around mental health issues.
So would that be an employee assistance program?
Yes, it is, yes. And so I don't know that people are using it for that purpose because the education's just not there. It's just not there. So a lot of us are still relying on social media to get our education around symptoms and how to manage them, because you'll find women are going to 4 or 5 doctors sometimes, not only to find one who has a bit of empathy, but if the first doctor you go to has got not a clue, they'll send you off to the gynaecologist. The gynaecologist isn't necessarily interested in your hormones. They're interested in your gynecological issues. So not only are we paying more times out of pocket to get nowhere further, so we're left on our own devices again, and you have to be prepared to advocate for yourself, and not everyone has the time, the energy or the financial resources to do that.
Yeah, and that's something you're looking to change, isn't it, with your YouTube channel and your the content that you're going to be putting out shortly. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, as I'm a teacher, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but 4 years ago I had my own stalwart experience when I went to the doctor and said, hey, listen, I'm about to turn 50. Is there anything I should be doing or taking for this menopause thing? And she said, oh, are you planning on getting pregnant? And of course I'm thinking, is she on drugs? Like, I'm nearly 50 years old. Why would she ask me that? Because I didn't know that estrogen and progesterone are so much more than reproductive hormones. Now, if I didn't know that, now I'm a university educated woman, I'm white, I'm privileged. If I don't know this, there are so many other women who probably don't know this either. We have to assume they don't know. So I got off from that phone call and I had to Google what progesterone was because I honestly did not know. And that's where I learned, it's responsible for maintaining the integrity of the uterus. And I thought, I wonder if there's anything about estrogen I don't know. So I Googled that. And then all my symptoms made sense. But my doctor hadn't bothered to tell me that. Perhaps she didn't know either, I don't know. So interestingly, I've spent the last few years doing courses, because I can't help myself, and reading everything that's been coming out. And so I follow, Dr. Mary Claire Haber, who's an obstetrician gynecologist from the US, Dr. Vonda Wright, who's an orthopedic surgeon from the US as well, Dr. Kelly Casperson, who's a urologist. It was interesting, and I was finding with everything I was learning, there were some core common pillars across all of them. And being a mum of a young woman in her 20s, I thought, there's no way I want her to have to find this out the way I've had to. I decided I would summarise it all up for her. And while she was at uni, I decided to send her a text with my 13 things that she needed to do. And I called her up and I said, so, sweetheart, did you get my list? And she goes, oh, Mum, was that list of like 13 things? I said, yes, thinking I'm Mother of the Year over here. And she said, no, Mum, I got about halfway through and I lost interest. So I thought, okay, we've got to make this a bit more attractive. So I came up with an acronym called STRONG to make it easy for people to remember, but also for them to consider the domains in their life that they might need to pay some attention to. So the S stands for schedule testing, scans and sleep. So your scheduled testing, get a regular blood test, for example. If you don't get a blood test once a year, how do you have the data to know what is normal and baseline for you? And how do you identify when things are changing? Okay, that's the first thing. Bone density was fascinating to me because I learnt from Dr. von der Wright that our bone density starts to change from the age of 30. If you're a breastfeeding mum and your vitamin and mineral intake, your nutrition is inadequate, you are at risk of losing up to 20% of your bone density every time you breastfeed a child. So it's easy to see that by the time you're 50, you could have suboptimal bone density. But in Australia, we don't have a bone density scan covered until we're 70 years old. We're already frail by then. We're already in osteopenia and osteoporosis. In fact, they say that over 60% of Australians aged over 50 or 55 are in osteopenia or osteoporosis. So if you can go and get yourself a scan, in Australia it cost me $120 out of pocket, they've got some more data because you can intervene earlier then. And then sleep. I think we've all been hearing about how crucial sleep is, so I won't spend any time there. The next one was T for testosterone, estrogen and progesterone. You need to know that if you're dragging yourself around with no energy, maybe your testosterone's too low, because women are actually born with testosterone. We make more testosterone than we do estrogen. We have 1/10 to 1/20 the amount of testosterone as a male. We have our peak amount in our 20s, but by the time we're 50, we're down to 1/4 to 1/2 of what we had. Would it be nice to get that back?
Yeah, and that's something that I learned that I didn't realise that women needed testosterone.
And you can be tested for that, whereas they don't like to test you for estrogen and progesterone as far as a symptom management. They will just look at your symptoms for perimenopause because estrogen and progesterone spike even daily. All right, so, but testosterone you can get tested. And the R was for resistance exercise, rest and relationships. So the other thing I learned is that to help maintain your bone density, you need to do weight-bearing exercise. So if you can do 2 gym sessions a week, great. If not, get a weight vest to wear while you're walking. Maybe you can do some home gym stuff. If you don't want to go to the gym, grab some dumbbells. And I watched a really interesting lecture at the menopause conference by a professor in muscles, and he said, do some strength snacking, have some dumbbells at your desk, do some arms, overhead presses, do some squats at your desk every half an hour if you think of it. Not that I've been able to. I think I need a dedicated session for that. Yeah. But the other thing is, as we age, we need more rest and recovery time. We're slower to recover. Okay, so, but honestly, ask yourself, as a young person, was rest ever celebrated in your household? Wasn't in mine. If you were resting, you were lazy, so you needed to be found something to do. But we need to do that actively. And then relationships. Your mental health and your emotional well-being is impacted by your relationships at home. So I think we need to pay attention to that. O was for optimised nutrition, because we all know that getting enough protein in your day is like your second job. So no less than 100 grams a day. And notice changes. Women usually push through. We're good at looking after everybody else, but it's like the lights on the dashboard of your car. If the light goes on the dashboard of your car, usually you book it in. You go to the shop, you get it sorted out. But if your dashboard lights come on, you just, I'll be fine. I'll just push through. So N was for notice changes, and I think that's where the symptom checker is great. And then G, get connected, which is what we were talking about earlier. Have someone to talk to, whether it's at home, whether it's with your health professionals or at work. Yeah. It's
certainly a topic that constantly comes up when there's more often than not a group of females and just chatting about different symptoms and impacts and things that people have done. So that's fantastic. So one last question then for you, Manny. If an employer was to do one thing only, what would be that one thing that would move the needle?
That's such a hard question. I think the biggest thing is if you can educate your staff, educate your leaders, because if you make a workplace where people feel seen, heard, cared for and understood, I think that goes a long way to making people feel valued and encouraging trust and loyalty in the workplace. Okay. That's what I think.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you'll be back in the UK
will.
later on in the year. We've got lots of collaboration ideas, haven't we?
We have,
So,
yes.
and we'll drop a link to Manny's YouTube channel and video at some point, and you can all go and check that out. So thank you very much, Manny, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.